Hi there, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to go ahead and get started here in a minute, just letting some attendees start to trickle in. But we're very excited to be bringing you a fantastic webinar today. So thank you for joining us live, and we'll start here in just a moment. Okay, well, as people start trickling in, we'll go ahead and get started. Feel free to let us know where you're coming from, where you're joining us from. They're in the chat below. But to introduce myself, my name is Diana Alarcon. I'm part of the marketing team here at Ionic. And we're very excited to have you here with us today to go over our great webinar on the topic of automate inventory data collection with Zebra DataWedge and Ionic Capacitor. So before officially handing off the presentation to our presenters for today, I'm just going to go over a few housekeeping items. First of which, this webinar presentation is being recorded, so you will have access to a recording a little bit later on today, or if not today, a little bit later this week. So we'll make sure to get that to you in a post-event email along with a post-event survey. So be on the lookout for that afterwards. And if you have any questions throughout the presentation, make sure to include those in the Q&A. So that should be located near the bottom of your screen. Like I said, feel free to insert comments, say hello to us in the chat. That's also located below. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll get to those questions as soon as we can. But with all of that being said, it's my pleasure to get on to the main event while you're here, of course. And so I'd love to be able to introduce you to our presenters. Today we have Dallas James, who is a product manager at Ionic, and we're very lucky to have us here with us, Darren Campbell, who's developer relations at Zebra. So thank you so much, Darren and Dallas, for joining us today, and we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you, Anna. So our agenda for today, we're really excited to share this, coordination together between Ionic and Zebra DataWedge, and really go into some detail about this latest integration that we have put together here at Ionic that allows you to use all of your Zebra applications together and devices with your Ionic applications. So we're going to do a quick intro for Ionic, just kind of going into the background of Ionic. What is Ionic? Just to give an overview for anyone who might be not as familiar with Ionic Stack. Then we will dive into working with Darren and talking about Zebra, and he'll give some background on the Zebra as a company, and then we'll talk about the Zebra DataWedge, the application that he's put together, and he'll give us a quick demo of everything he's put together. Then at the very end, we'll have some time left over for some Q&A. So Ionic is the leading cross-platform developer solution using a web-first approach to app development. What this means is that Ionic is built on top of web technologies, which are the technologies that are familiar to the majority of developers in the world today. This technology is used to power more than 15% of devices or of apps in the app stores, and it is used by over 5 million developers worldwide. This technology that we've built and is available is widely adopted across several industries, from transportation to finance and even into logistics. And so we have lots of experience working with various companies in different industries. Ionic applications are native applications, right? So anytime you use a native app, you open up that application on your phone, it is powered potentially by Ionic. And what that is it is a web technology-based application that is all put together and is deployed as a native app onto your native devices. That means all of the interfaces, all of the user experiences built with web technologies that are incredibly familiar to lots of developers, but it still has the full functionality and power of all of the device features that are available to hardware devices. All of this is done using our capacitor technology, which is essentially a native shell or a bridge that allows your web technology to communicate with all of these native plugins on the device. All of this runs inside of a web view, so it's the same as running a browser, but it's running inside of your application. Oftentimes you'll see this known as web native, right? That's a very key term that you'll see that would refer to that will refer to this technology. So Ionic as a platform is built of several different components. We have Ionic UI, which is a suite of 100 plus components that are all adaptive to the operating system on which they're running. We have examples here up on the slide of a card, which is a very common UI pattern, a UI design. And you can see on Android versus iOS how the styles adapt and reflect the best practices for each of the platforms. This allows your applications built with Ionic to feel at home on whatever device they're running on with very minimal effort on the part of the developer. Capacitor, on the other hand, is the technology that allows you to run these web applications on your device as a native application. This is a bridge, and it really functions in that way, and it's what allows your web application to communicate with hardware features, such as the camera module or the geolocation module. All of these are what allows your application to really come to life on a mobile application. And today we're going to talk specifically about using the Zebra hardware together with Capacitor on your device. We also build app extensions, which are really high quality plugins for your device to do very common and important tasks on your mobile app, including authentication using Auth Connect. We can do high performance and encrypted storage using Ionic Storage. And we also have Identity Vault, which allows you to securely store data and keys behind biometric authentication on device. We also support several official integrations, from Couchbase Lite to Google and Apple Pay to Microsoft Intune. And today we're really excited to be talking through one of our latest integrations, which is with Zebra Technologies. And as Diana mentioned earlier, today here with us is Darren Campbell from Zebra to talk and go into depth a little bit more about this exact Zebra integration that we're here to talk about. So Darren, I'm going to turn over control of this presentation to you.
Thank you very much.
Go into it.
I should have been more prepared. Let me put the slideshow up. So, first of all, I will apologize. I was diagnosed as having COVID yesterday positively. So if I get a little bit croaky or start coughing, then I apologize up front.
I'm gonna hope you feel better soon.
Yeah, me too. Thank you. I didn't want to miss this presentation though. So I'm just going to go over what Zebra is. I'm guessing a lot of people on this call probably already know, because why would you come to a Zebra Ionic integration presentation if you weren't familiar with Zebra? But let me start at the ground. So we are a ruggedized Android manufacturer, OEM. And you see some of our devices that I'm showing on the screen here. We have a presence in transport and logistics, in warehousing, in like personal shopping or buy online, pick up in store. So many of the top Fortune 500 companies will be using our devices. For example, if you've ever had a package delivered at your house, and well, maybe not so much nowadays, but remember you used to have to sign on the screen. Those were our devices. Or if you do your personal shopping, like I know it's not prevalent in every country, but many countries you will scan your own shopping. That will often be one of our devices, like this one down in the corner here. So yeah, you've probably interacted with Zebra devices maybe without even knowing it, and frequently once you start looking out for that Zebra logo, you'll see them more and more places. The obvious question is, like, Ionic is a cross-platform framework, and Zebra is specifically manufacturing Android devices. Why would a developer of Ionic choose to, other way around? Why would a developer who needs to write an app for Zebra, I couldn't remember who I worked for then, use Ionic? And the reason is because it's your skill set. So what we find is many developers come to us and they are Ionic developers, and they've, for one reason or another, they've been tasked with writing an app for Zebra devices, and so they logically choose to use Ionic because it's what they're familiar with. And immediately, one of the problems we've had in the past is Zebra only offered a native Android SDK and a native Xamarin SDK. So what do you do? Like, how do you integrate with the barcode scanner? I mean, we have many different features on our devices. I'm really going to be talking about the barcode scanner because that's like 95% of data capture. And I know that's what the Ionic plugin is really targeted towards. So the way that you would do that, and the reason that we're talking about DataWedge here, let me just give you some of the fundamentals of what DataWedge is. I think that would help lay the groundwork here. So DataWedge is a service that runs on every Zebra Android device, and it's responsible for interacting with the data capture hardware. So I mentioned the scanner, but also many of our devices have RFID. They might have serial input. They might have magstripe readers as well. But let's just talk about the barcode scanner here. If you were writing a native application with Android or Xamarin, you as the app developer need to have full responsibility of like the threading model and making sure that the instances of that, because there's only one scanner like piece of hardware on the device, so you're fully responsible for making sure that gets torn down at the relevant points in your application. If you're using a Bluetooth scanner, I should say, then your application needs to work in the background with the screen off. It's not always obvious how to do this integration, and so DataWedge fills that gap, makes everything easier for you. It takes full control of the scanner. What you as the developer do is you define what we call a profile, and the profile will say how you want the scanner configured. So for example, different symbologies. I think everyone's familiar with QR codes. So you might want to only scan QR codes. You might want to only scan the sort of UPC barcodes that you see in a shop. So that's the example of a configuration. We've literally got hundreds of other configurations. They're just like the simpler ones. And then how do you want your application to receive that data? And in the past, like years ago, you would have probably been injecting keystrokes into your app. So you scan the barcode and you would receive in your app sort of key, you would listen to on key down and you say, oh, okay, I'll get 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever the barcode is. That's not very easy to parse out for the application. And so most apps nowadays will use Android intents. So you end up with an intent handler in your application, and that's how you receive barcode scans. And the obvious, like, elephant in the room here is Ionic do not natively support Android intents. And because it's a cross-platform framework and intents are specifically for Android, what we've had previously, and this is where the great advantage of what Ionic have done comes in. When a customer would come to us, Zebra, and say, I want to write an Ionic app for Zebra devices, the only solution that we would be able to offer that customer is something which I had personally developed. Like I'd created a plugin which handled intents, completely unsupported. It was just me in my own free time developing this thing. And like it doesn't scale. Like you don't get the reassurance of actually using some supported software if it's just some open source piece of software that some guy on the internet has released. And I'm actually going to be leaving Zebra next week, sadly. So everyone that's using the existing solution is not going to get any future feature updates from myself, obviously. So it's really great to see Ionic have produced something which is being able to be used in an enterprise scenario, because obviously enterprise, you need to have support, and you want it to work. Time is money, as they say, so any bit of downtime is undesirable. Let me just talk about how DataWedge works, and then I'll talk about what the Ionic team have done to really expose this for Zebra devices. So I put this together. Originally, I was trying to put some cheesy animation together, but I've ended up using this over the past years because it fulfills its purpose of defining what DataWedge is. So apologize if this is a bit cheesy. You have your DataWedge, you have your device, your Zebra Android device, and every one of our Zebra devices comes with a application and service that we call DataWedge. So you see I've highlighted the icon there. And if you think about this as an application stack, then DataWedge lives at the bottom of the stack, and it's responsible for integrating with the hardware, like the scanner at the front there. So you have an application that you're running on your device. I mean, this was a very simple app that I put together. Obviously, yours would look a lot nicer than this, and that's living at the top of the stack. And somehow we need to get data, we need to communicate between the application and DataWedge. So what happens is whenever you scan a barcode, like this is me pressing the hardware trigger on the side, for example, the yellow scanning trigger. When you scan a trigger, the barcode, what's it called? It's not a laser anymore. It used to be a laser, but let's call it a laser. Laser comes out the front, decodes the barcode, and then what happens is an intent is sent from DataWedge to your application. And you can choose whether you receive that intent as a start activity, send broadcast, start service. I see most people choose to receive that as a broadcast intent, and you can specify the components so it becomes an explicit broadcast, and therefore there's no security concerns because only you are able to register for that, your app, I should say, sorry. And then I scan another barcode and I get another intent. So every time I scan a barcode, I get an intent. There's more complex use cases. We have multi-barcode and like OCR and all sorts of other stuff. But just for now, we'll keep it simple. One barcode equals one intent. So it's important to understand that separate from that whole scanning, getting an intent, there is a DataWedge API. And this is an API which Zebra have developed and released, and we call it an intent-based API. Because it is. So you have the capability to send a command to DataWedge. Your application can request that DataWedge perform some kind of function. And I think the example I've got here is, rather than me pressing on the hardware trigger there, I might want to invoke like start scan as a soft scan, we call it. So like you trigger the scan from the application. And when you send that, the scan happens and you get an intent to notify you as an application that you've done your scan. That's the simple scenario. There's also going the other way. So rather than just telling DataWedge to do something, you might ask DataWedge a question. You might say, enumerate all of the scanners that you have visibility to. And I sort of alluded to this earlier on, and I do actually show this in my demo application, but like it's not just the front laser scanner imager, sorry, we call them nowadays, I'm using the old terminology, but it's not just the front imager. You can also use the camera as a scanner. No, not the front camera, because there's a funny story there, but yeah, obviously you've not got barcodes on your face. Or Bluetooth scanners. We support a wide range of Bluetooth scanners that you can connect to these devices and scan that way. So you can enumerate the available scanners. When you do that, you will obviously get a response back to your application with the array of scanners. And the reason I wanted to show this is because when we start talking about what Ionic have done with their Ionic, I'm trying to look at it, they've called it Zebra Scanner. They have essentially wrapped the DataWedge API and wrapped the ability to receive these intents back. And so they have the full capabilities that DataWedge provides through Android native intents, but now you can access that through your Ionic application. So what I've done, I have, obviously Ionic reached out to me and they said, hey, we've got this great working relationship. We've had lots of large enterprise customers in the past, and we're thinking about creating this new plugin. Can you take a look at it and sort of give us your feedback? And so I ended up creating a sample application, which is completely unsupported, as it does something that I've produced myself. Note that it's from my own GitHub repository rather than the Zebra GitHub repository. If there are issues with it, then feel free to raise issues on that repository, and I'm sure we can get those addressed. But the other caveat here is I'm not by training an Ionic developer. I'm a Java developer, actually, is what I did at university. So I try and dabble here and there, but please don't look at my application code and think, oh, why has he done it that way, or why has he done it this other way? It's almost certainly because I didn't quite know what I was doing when I was writing the app. But I do consider myself an expert in DataWedge. So yeah, hopefully I've put enough in the app to give you an overview of sort of how it works. So let me just go into the demo now, I think it is, and sort of show you what this looks like. So this is my device I have here, and let me just talk you through what the UI looks like. I'm not going to be going through line by line of the code. I'm just going to point out maybe the more interesting pieces of information. So we have the DataWedge version. This is actually one of the most recent devices that Zebra have produced. So we're on DataWedge 11.2. That's an example of where you're asking DataWedge a question and you get a callback with the version. So that's how I've used that. Same with the active profile. I mentioned we have this profile mechanism, the way to configure DataWedge. So what we have is when this application first boots up, It will create a profile, associate that profile with your application. When your app comes to the foreground, DataWedge is smart enough to, and we've got like hooks in the underlying Android BSP to do this efficiently. DataWedge is smart enough to say, oh, that application is in the foreground, apply this profile with all of those scanner configurations. And like I've got decoders down here, then one example of the configuration might be to enable EN8 or enable EN13. Well, whatever else it does here. The other things this app does, it's got some messaging that comes back. That's the output from the Ionic API. I'm able to select a scanner. So by default, it's going to use the imager at the top. I can also use the camera on the back, or there's all sorts of other Bluetooth integration that we support. Incidentally, it got a bit much because every single Bluetooth scanner was being exposed as a separate model number. And so we just kind of gave up with that. And that's why we have this like more generic Zebra Bluetooth scanner at the bottom of it. But I don't have one charged up. It's in the drawer over there. Anyway, let me dismiss that. When I scan a barcode, so I've got a book here. This is I think it's a code, an EN8 barcode, and I'll just sort of scroll up. Oh no, EN13, and you'll see I've got the barcode appears at the bottom there. I think I've got a QR code here. I can scan my QR code, which I put together just before this presentation, and I just sort of output the scans in a list format at the bottom here. If I disable EN13, just to show you what happens, here we are, EN13. And now I'm trying to scan, I mean, you'll have to take my word for it that I am actually trying to scan. It obviously doesn't scan because I've disabled that decoder. The reason you might want to do that, incidentally, our devices are a lot more efficient if they know that they're only looking for specific symbologies, decoders. Like most, if you're familiar with how you integrate something like Zebra Crossing, which incidentally has nothing to do with Zebra the company, it's just a similar name. They only support like 8 or 9 symbologies. We support over 100 of worldwide, strange, unique, like Australia Postal has its own symbology, for example. So you almost certainly you want to disable most of those before you only enable the ones you're looking for. It just makes everything a lot more efficient. Although like we're still faster than like camera scanning. Anyway. So let me show you some of the code behind this because I know I have a tendency to whittle on, and I have it over here. So what Ionic have done, which is really nice, I've got their documentation here. They have essentially got 4 different classes. They've got Zebra configuration, Zebra notification, Zebra query, and Zebra runtime. Like based on the type of thing that you're asking DataWedge to do is what sort of class that you're using. So for example, Zebra notification is when I need to be notified that a scan has happened, or I need to be notified that the state of the scanner has changed. For example, it's gone from waiting for a trigger press to actively scanning. If I need any of that, then it's the Zebra notification. If I want to do some kind of configuration change, I mentioned earlier on we had profiles where we could specify the configuration within that profile. If I want to create, modify, manage those profiles, then you're using the Zebra configuration class. I'm just looking over because they're on my other screen what they do here. Zebra query is things like enumerating the scanners or getting the active profile where I was asking DataWedge a question and getting a response back. Is how you use those. And then finally, Zebra runtime is if you just want to make a temporary change to the current profile. And I think the example there was where I was disabling the, I'll press the right button here, where I was disabling the EN13 profile. I've sort of implemented that through the Zebra runtime method. Let me just show you some of the code. It's quite simple. Deliberately, I'll let me pretend that I made it deliberately simple so it's easy to follow. Not at all, because I didn't know 100% what I was doing, but because I'm not an Ionic developer by training. But yeah, the plugin is through Ionic Enterprise Zebra Scanner. So I understand that you do need to have a license to use this. Maybe I'll let Dallas talk more to that. I'm not a expert in Ionic licensing, though. Like Dallas just gave me a license key to use when I was doing my development. And the register for notification, quite importantly, and this is something which I see a lot of people not struggle with, that's not the right word, but the way DataWedge works, underneath is that when you're defining how you want to receive the scans in your app or receive any kind of feedback, then you need to tell DataWedge the action that you're going to register for. So the way Ionic have set this up, and that's actually the way I recommend most customers set this up, is they're going to send, like, under the covers, they're going to send a broadcast intent, which they are actually actively listening for, and then when they get that, they will return that value through the API. But one thing to just be aware of is whenever you see, like if you're looking through my sample here, and for example, I've specified the app name in register notification, and then back down here, there's a Darren Ionic Capacitor action. A lot of people will confuse, like, when I specify what. Hopefully you can copy and paste a lot of what I've done here, but you'll notice that, and maybe I should have gone through this in a slightly different order, but like I have multiple instances where I'm using this intent action. So let me just give a sort of a very simple explanation of what I'm doing here. This method here, including Zebra configuration set config. So remember, Zebra configuration was how the Ionic team are going to modify or create profiles. So this is where I'm actually setting up the original profile for my app. I'm not doing anything special. I'm just using the default configuration for the scanner settings, but I am passing in this array of JSON objects here to make sure that I'm going to receive the data correctly. So the first thing I'm doing is saying, yeah, I need to enable the barcode. That's the imager at the top of the device, and I need to disable keystrokes. So do you remember earlier on I said, in the long ago, applications would send keystrokes and key down, just to make sure that the application doesn't get confused and it gets bombarded with random keystrokes which change the UI and do all sorts of other things. I just set that to false, so I'm not going to get keystroke output. And then this here is where I'm defining the intent which gets invoked when a scan happens. So I'm choosing this is the intent action. You need to make sure that this is in common, and this is where I'm sort of associating the profile with myself, sorry. But yeah, this intent action, just make sure that that matches the action that you specify whenever Ionic are asking you for an intent action. And the obvious example, well, obvious to me, sorry, but maybe the more simple example to talk about. Do you remember earlier on, I was mentioning that the hardware trigger is not the only way to trigger a scan. I can use a soft button on the device. So in my app here, I have a button which will initiate the scan without having to press the hardware button. So I can actually, I've only got so many hands, but you can imagine I'm not going to press it, but I'm going to press on the screen here, and it does receive the scan. This button is the floating action button, obviously. So what that's doing, that's invoking the Zebra runtime soft scanner trigger, and you have to pass in the same what's this? The same action. It's just something to bear in mind. That's something I went back and forth with the Ionic team on, just to make sure that the most common functionality that you're going to use with DataWedge was all you're able to do that with the Ionic plugin. So I'm not going to go through line by line, like I said earlier on, everything that this sample app does. I have released it under MIT, so feel free to take this, use it. It's fully commercialized, or obviously modify it as you will. The link is in the presentation, and I've tried to do as much representative as I can of the different capabilities of the Ionic API. Actually, before I hand back to the rest of the team, I'll just show you another example of, like, this is using the Zebra runtime switch scanner API. So I'm going to switch scanner to the camera scanner. And when I do that, I can scan a QR code by pressing the button here. And you see this is my my office there, but actually it's too quick to really demonstrate, but that's the piece of paper. And then as soon as it even notices the QR code, the camera's going to scan that. So with that, I think that's probably all I want to demonstrate. Let me go back to the slide deck. Actually, no, before I do that, if you do find yourself in a quandary, let me make this clear. Then what I've found is the documentation is really good that Ionic have put together, but sometimes, let me go to the switch scanner instance, for example. What was it? Zebra runtime, switch scanner, here we go. So Ionic might be pointing you back to Zebra documentation. So you really have to use both the Ionic documentation and the Zebra documentation to understand exactly what you need to, the parameters that you need to provide to your app. Another example, do you remember I was saying that I was enabling the EN13 decoder? I was disabling it, wasn't I? That was an example of switch scanner params. See, it takes like an option here, switch scanner params options, and it's not entirely clear what I had to pass into it. So in that instance, then you'll probably need to not reach out, but you'll just need to go onto the Zebra tech docs, or honestly, just use my application. And on tech docs, this is where it had this whole list of the different decoders that are supported. Like I can search for decoder _ EN13, and that's how I knew the string to pass into the API. But I'm sure that's something that will become more obvious in time, and that's why I really wanted to put this app together, to make it easier for someone to just take something working and modify it for your own needs. So I'm going to go back to the slides now, like I keep promising to do, but I didn't actually do until now. And I think, this next slide was just me giving some resources. So this is the link to my application. There's the documentation from Ionic, as well as the DataWedge API docs. Remember, that's written from the point of view of they're just Android intent APIs. They're not written expecting you to use like the Ionic plugin, but they provide the generic information of what sort of things you pass into these APIs. So with that, I will I'll just keep driving the presentation, Dallas, and you just tell me when you want to go next. Does that make sense as a way to continue?
Yeah, that definitely works. So I think this is probably I think we might have one other slide after this, but the demo you gave was absolutely fantastic. And it really showed off, not only the power of Zebra, but also the power of the plugin that we've put together. Anyone who's spent time in Android intents land knows that that's not an easy API to really get a hold of, wrap your head around, and be able to digest easily. And so, that's really one of the goals here between Ionic and Zebra in building this integration. Is we want developers and companies that have significant web dev teams, because all of these companies have a web presence already, right? So you have web developers that are already available, and now you can use those web developers to work on your mobile apps to really get that backlog out of the way, right? And you can do it using this integration. And so that's the whole point of that, is so that you can focus on your business value. Darren made the great point of, when you have downtime and things like that, that's costing your business money, and that's not what your business wants to be investing in, right? You want to invest in what makes your business unique, whatever that specifically looks like. And so this integration is there to just remove all the complexities of working with Zebra, so that you can just get up and running extremely quickly, and then jump into the rest of what makes your business your business. The other benefits here, right? Again, tying into this integration is an enterprise solution that we provide from Ionic, and that means that it's backed by our world-class support and services. So if you have any issues with the plugin and integrating the plugin, or the plugin has issues on the latest Android version, right? Because those versions change, things change in the Android ecosystem quickly. Ionic is there to support you and to make sure that you're not down, right? And to make sure that you're able to get back up and running as quickly as possible. And that includes ongoing updates, support, and things like that. So there's a couple of questions here that I wanted to just walk through quickly. And Darren, I think this first one would be a great one for you to look at. Someone asked if DataWedge supports the RFID scanning.
Yes, DataWedge does on certain devices, so not all devices. It is something that we're looking to expand to support more devices. I don't know off the top of my head if Ionic support RFID through their plugin, though. I think the answer is no. So that maybe I'll throw that back to you, Dallas, whether you sort of support that RFID functionality or not.
Yeah, I think as long as it goes through the DataWedge API, then it should be supported. And I did see something in the documentation in there as well relating to triggering an RFID soft scan as well. So I think it comes down to having the right combination of hardware, like you mentioned, of a device that would support RFID, and then it goes through DataWedge.
Yeah, you do. Like if you look on the tech docs for get a plugins and then RFID, it will give you the list of devices we support. There's a combination of integrated RFID, and also we have a Bluetooth connected sled, I think it is, and we've recently started supporting that through DataWedge, or it's on the roadmap. But yeah, look at the documentation for the latest on that.
Yeah, definitely. So one of the other things out there, Zebra, they do a lot more than just this, than just scanners, right? Like there's lots of other protocols and things that are, and you'll have to forgive me if protocols isn't the right word, but there's lots of other services that Zebra provides, right? Could you speak to a bit more about those? And I think we also have a poll to go along with this for anyone to show any interest in either of these integrations that we could potentially provide in the future.
Yeah, so I mean, my area of expertise is our Android devices, but Zebra as a company, we have, you mentioned RFID. So I gave an answer with RFID on device, but we also have fixed RFID readers. There's a separate SDK for that. We have printers. Obviously, that's how we got our start in the 60s, was as a printer manufacturer. Mobile printers, desktop printers, card printers. There's a separate SDK again for that. And we also have dedicated scanners that don't have Android on board, but you can communicate to them from Android devices. Some of those we support with DataWedge, but not all. And so I guess the question I think in the poll is, like, we've spoken about Zebra Android devices, but are there any other Zebra technologies, RFID, printing, that would be beneficial to expose through an officially supported Ionic plugin? So LinkOS is our printing SDK, sorry, RFID, obviously. So RFID, we're talking about maybe fixed readers or on the device. DCS is the dedicated scanners. I don't even know what those stand for. Or if you want to do any kind of device configuration, that would be MX. Maybe we could have, in fact, this is on me, so I apologize for this, but we could have been more descriptive of the options here. So the options there, top one's printing, second one's RFID, third one is separate scanners, and fourth one is kind of Android device configuration through an API on the device.
Yeah, and I know that I've heard about printing in requests as we've kind of explored this integration with some of the customers at Ionic. I know there have been some interest in the printers as well, because then you can it's kind of that 1-2 punch, right? So you're in an inventory setting, you can use your phone to print barcodes that are specific to all of your Zebra scanners, slap them on your inventory, and then turn around and you also have the scanning functionality, and it's all kind of built in and packaged together in that single application.
Yeah, it's really common, and it's an area where we could do better, Zebra as a company, to make it more harmonized, should we say, because everything has a different SDK, everything has a different lineage, acquisitions, whatever. Now we have all the solutions, all the bits and pieces, but you use it all in different ways. So wouldn't it be great if you were an Ionic user and you used everything in the same way through Ionic plugins, and Ionic just sort of takes care of the fact that Zebra have different ways of doing things depending on the hardware.
Yeah, definitely. So it looks like we got another question in here. So if a separate Zebra scanner is used, can DataWedge be made available on a host Android OS or a non-Zebra Android device?
So if a separate Zebra scanner is used, sorry, can you read the question again, please?
Yeah,
I can probably find the questions.
Yeah, so the question reads, if a separate Zebra scanner is used, so I'm assuming they're referring to like a maybe a handheld scanner, potentially over Bluetooth would be my understanding. Can DataWedge be made available to the Android host OS if you're not on like the device you're using, right, is a specific Zebra Android device, as opposed to maybe a Samsung device that's paired up with a Zebra technology device?
Yep, understood. No, so the answer is no. We don't offer DataWedge on non-Zebra devices. Over the years, we've sort of had this conversation internally more times than I care to imagine, but it's never happened. So I can't imagine it happening in the future. What I did do, and this is going a little bit off topic now, I did sort of put together a proof of concept of how that might work. It's in my GitHub repository. I think it's called generic scan wedge, but I essentially rewrote DataWedge to run on a consumer device and expose the same kind of API that you might see on a Zebra device versus, well, actually, yeah, I mimicked the DataWedge API as it was at the time. And it's fairly simple to do because you're just talking about exchanging intents, and then you have to integrate with some kind of scanning library that's going to work on the Android OS. The difficulty, though, is keeping everything up to date. Like when I did that about 4 or 5 years ago, that was using DataWedge version 6.2, and obviously we're now on 11.2. So you can do it, but we don't have anything like for you supported, I'm afraid.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's something, if someone was really determined, they could probably come up with something to replicate that DataWedge API surface and get that to work. And I mean, if you're replicating the surface, good chance it might work with the capacitor integration as well.
Yeah, definitely, absolutely. And the scanners themselves support a serial port profile, so I think that was the most popular way I saw this being done at the time. So it has direct communication with the scanner.
Awesome. Okay, well, I think that's all of the questions that we have for today. Darren, I really appreciate your time. I think we're going to throw it back over to Diana to wrap up. She had a few closing comments, and we will wrap this webinar up.
Thank you. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Yes, thank you so much to both of you for an amazing presentation. Like I said earlier, this is being recorded, so you'll be able to reference portions of this recording or of this presentation, the entire thing, share it with other colleagues later on today. But before closing out today's presentation, I did just want to share a few resources here for the group. First of which I'll be inserting in the chat a post-event survey. Your feedback is incredibly important to us and incredibly appreciated. So if you have 2 minutes to go ahead and fill out that survey, this allows the entire Ionic team to keep producing the highest quality of webinars for you and to make sure that we're producing content that you want to hear from us, that you want to see. So once again, your feedback is so incredibly appreciated. So please feel free to reference that link in the chat if you have time to go ahead and give us your feedback. And then one thing of many, because as Dallas knows, we're always working on so many new things, so many events here at Ionic, but one thing that we're extremely excited to be able to announce and share with you all today. And once my screen starts sharing here, okay, hopefully you can all see that, but I am incredibly excited to be able to announce that our 3rd ever Ionic Conf is coming up this year, May 25th. So we're extremely excited about this event. It's bringing it back to celebrating the community that we're a part of. We'll have amazing sessions, whether they're 30 minutes or 10-minute lightning talks, panel discussions, and a lot more. So if you're able to join us, consider this your save the date for May 25th. It's, as always, a free 1-day virtual event. And I'd also specifically like to call out the fact that we have our CFP that is live and open. So if you or a colleague is interested in sharing a presentation with us, then please go ahead and fill out that CFP. I'm also going to link that in the chat for everyone to reference. But once again, I'd like to thank our presenters today and thank you for joining us. So thank you everyone very much for attending today, and we'll see you all on the next one.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.